Hello YouTubers, welcome to Big Buddha is Watching. I'm Big Buddha, and today welcome to, well, my second Red Dwarf video, but my first review, retrospective if you will. Like I said in my life as a Red Dwarf fan videos, some of these videos, including this one, are going to be two-pronged things. So in this video I'm going to be doing a retrospective review, if you like, on Red Dwarf 1, Red Dwarf Series 1, recorded in 1987, broadcast early 88. And I will also be giving my, what I call, initial thoughts on Red Dwarf Series 12, Episode 1, which I watched for the first time last night, which was an episode called Cured. So I'll be doing that at the end of the video. So if you want to, I don't know how long this one will be, but if you just want to find out my thoughts on Cured, go forward to, I don't know, the last 5 minutes of the video. But first up, I will be talking about where it all began, Series 1. So, in the break as well, from my usual format, these I usually make notes on when I do reviews, and I haven't done that with Red Dwarf because, like I said, I've been watching the show now for 25 years, and not just watching it, but devouring any little snippet of information I can on the program, and I feel I've accumulated in that time quite an extensive knowledge of the show. Maybe even more than some of the cast and crew, but who knows. So I'm going to just maybe with these videos just try and talk about the show, see what comes to mind, try and dispense with the notes. So these might be a little more chaotic than my usual reviews, if that's at all possible. So let's go, let's see what happens. So, yeah, as I said, the Red Dwarf Series 1, it was broadcast early 88. I think it was meant to be broadcast in 87, at least the year at the end of the credits says 87. Funny enough, the original pilot episode, well, not actually the pilot episode, but the pilot script was written in, well, it's actually in my Red Dwarf Omnibus edition, which contains the first and second novels, which I showed you the other day, as a little, it's almost like a book extra, instead of in the days before, because this predates DVD extras. At the end of the books you have a few extra features, one of which is the beer mat with the original idea scrolled on. Here it says long-term goals, write sitcom set in space, clean kitchen, lavender sheets, spend a whole Sunday sober. That's probably Rob Grant's beer mat. You have one of the original scripts for Dave Holland's Space Cadet, which was a sketch show, I believe, broadcast on Radio 4 in 1983, written by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor. And among one of the cast members of it was Chris Barry, who, of course, is Rimmer. And they did a series of sketches. They've published one here, but I think on the DVDs they have a few more. But I believe on this one it's the one in the book. And what's interesting about the Dave Holland Space Cadet sketch is they essentially recycled it, I believe, in Me Squared, episode 6 of Series 1. It's the whole section where Holly's telling Dave Lister that the Norweb Federation are after him because he left the light on in the bathroom 3 million years ago, and he now owes billions of pounds in back rent, and also how he left 2 mouldy sausages in his fridge before he left Earth, and 3 million later years later, those sausages now cover 5/6 of the Earth's surface. That was all in the original Dave Hollins sketch with the computer Hab, not Hal or Holly, talking to Dave Hollins. And then, from, it says here, Draft 1, August 1984, so 3 years or 4 years prior to it being broadcast on BBC Two. You have the original pilot script, and it's a little different. I always assumed that this was, being a first draft, this was rewritten largely for the Series 1, for when they actually recorded the programmes. But I actually later found out... actually, no, it's not on this. It's on the Body Snatcher collection. But you do either get the deleted scenes on this. I actually found out that, no, that was actually the script that they filmed initially. Red Dwarf was unusual because they didn't have a pilot episode. They got the commission for the 6 episodes just on the strength of the script alone. After much trepidation, it took them 3 years to convince the BBC to do it, because the thinking at the time was that people don't like science fiction. I mean, the BBC have done lots and lots of great stuff over time, but they can be a little out of touch with popular thinking from times, almost willfully so. I think they see themselves as being... they still kind of have that attitude that the BBC should be doing what's good for the nation rather than what the nation actually wants to see. So where was I going? So yes, it took them a little time to convince the BBC to make Red Dwarf. But then usually when they did, I think there was... basically they got the whole series commissioned without making a pilot episode. And if you've seen the original assembly of the first episode, it's probably a good thing that they didn't get a pilot episode, because it might not have gone to series on the strength of the first episode, the original assembly. If you watch it, you realise that about half the episode was ultimately reshot, and basically to add more jokes in. That's what they felt that it was lacking in the original assembly. The original conception for Red Dwarf was because the BBC were hesitant to make it a science fiction program. They wanted to distance themselves from the sci-fi elements as much as possible. I don't know why, because they'd done Hitchhikers by this point, and Hitchhikers was very, very, very popular. But they didn't want it to be science fiction. So the way it was sold was, no, it's just a sitcom. It just happens to be set on a spaceship. And I think it was pitched as Steptoe and Son in space. It was basically two characters who couldn't stand each other, but forced to live together in this claustrophobic environment. And we just see them bickering for throughout the universe. That was the original intention of the series, was it to just largely focus around Lister and Rimmer and their relationship. And you can see that very much in the first series. There's lots and lots of scenes of them endlessly bickering. The cat was only meant to be a peripheral character. Holly was only meant to be a peripheral character. In fact, Holly was never actually meant to be seen. He was only ever meant to be a voiceover, and it was only after 3 episodes that Norman Lovett went to Rob Grant and Doug Naylor and said, "Look, you're missing a trick by not showing my face, because a lot of my delivery a lot of my timing comes down to seeing my face, seeing I always thought I make a good Holly, seeing my facial expressions in time with what I'm saying. And so that's when, so if you notice in the first 3 episodes, the scenes of Holly were actually shot at a later date and edited in. And if you look closely, you'll notice that Craig Charles or Rimmer is never actually talking directly to Holly. It's more like he's talking to a disembodied voice, and it's only after episode 3, from episode 4 onwards, that you start noticing Norman Lovett appearing on the monitor screens, albeit in a more pixelated form, to make him more computery. I never much like the pixelated look on his face. I much preferred it in series 2, and it was just Norman Lovett in a polo neck, and then later Hattie Hatridge, but they pixelated her more. So I was talking about the pirate. So yes, so if you own the Body Snatcher collection, you can watch the original assembly of the first episode, and you'll see that although it is well written, and there is definitely good characterization there and good comedic potential, the audience just isn't responding. There's whole scenes that go by almost without a single laugh, just a titter here and there, and then there might be like one big belly laugh here and there where something genuinely funny happens. And that's why when you watch The End, which is the name of episode 1, with all the reshot scenes, that's why you get in the first few scenes, gag after gag after gag, because they realised then that if this show was going to work, it needed jokes, it needed gags, it needed the big laughs to carry it through from then on. I mean, as I said in the last review, I'm just assuming that everyone knows Red Dwarf and knows the plot. For the first episode, The End. Well, I'll go through the episodes one by one. So episode 1 is The End, and that involves Dave List. He brings a domesticated house cat on board the mining ship Red Dwarf where he's working, and he gets in trouble for this. The captain wants it, but he refuses to give it up. So as punishment, he gets put into stasis for 6 months. When he wakes up, he finds out it's 3 million years later, and there was a radium breakout which killed the entire crew, and then for Holly to save his life, he had to wait to the radio reached a safe level before he could let Dave out. So it's 3 million years later, and he's now 3 million years from Earth. And so that basically sets up the series. Holly turns the ship around and they start heading back home, and they've been heading back home ever since. Also, in this episode, you meet Rimmer. He's essentially a ghost, is Rimmer, or a science fiction version of a ghost. He's a holographic reproduction of the Lister's former bunkmate, and Cat, who's a very imaginative conception for Cat, because he is a descendant of the cat that Lister initially got punished for keeping. And over time, over the 3 million years, he's evolved into James Brown, essentially. That was Danny John Jules' inspiration for the character. James Brown crossed with Richard Pryor. I think that's a really imaginative plot, and one of the big draws for me, probably more over the humour, was the imaginative plots of each episode. That's why in series 1, they're not the broadcast, obviously they had to put the end right at the start because that set up the story, but I believe that episodes 2 to 5 they rejigged the order of them that they were shot in, because Future Echoes was actually the fourth one they shot, and it was but it was deemed the most successful, wouldn't you know it, when or got the best reaction from the studio audience when it was shown. And wouldn't you know it, it was the science fiction episode. It was because Robert Grant and Doug Naylor essentially wanted to do science fiction and sort of smuggled it in to under the BBC's nose as the guise of a sitcom. So episode 2 is Future Echoes and involves a very imaginative plot in which Red Dwarf breaks the light barrier and the speed of light, and as a result they start seeing images of their own future, and then there's some very 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 clever scenes of Lister having a conversation with a future echo of Rimmer, but thinking it's happening now, and the conversation not making any sense, and then having the same conversation with Rimmer a second later, but this time it making perfect sense, but with Rimmer giving the same answers, obviously because it was an echo of the future, if you see what I mean. You know, you can imagine the BBC's trepidation, because on paper, as an idea, that just sounds out of left field and something that the audiences wouldn't pick up on. But it works. You know, it totally works. The episode. It's and it's one of the first episodes where you get a sense of what the show is about and how good it can be. Episodes 3 and 4, Balance of Power and Waiting for God, are I think much more what the BBC wanted the show to be, with the steptoe and son in space. You know, Balance of Power is basically just an excuse for Rimmer and Lister to bicker with each other for half an hour, and it involves, you know, because the big contention with Rimmer and Lister, at least in the early series, is the status. You know, Rimmer's very much the middle class character, but he's kind of a middle class underachiever, or you know, at least attempts to achieve, but just fails at every opportunity. And so he's only managed to rise to the rank of second technician. So with that little bit of power, he's going to lord it over Lister, who's a lowly third technician. And so Balance of Power is a very flimsy plot about Lister taking a chef's exam, so he'll outrank Rimmer. Waiting for God is more of you know, the Rimmer Lister dynamic, but there is and the part I like about that episode, even though it's largely, I mean, I think Rob Grant says it's his least favourite episode. But the part I do like is where it extrapolates on the history of the cat race more, and you know, you go into cat religion and how it's all based on Lister's laundry list that he used to line the cat's case with, and how this led to holy wars and things. You know, really imaginative stuff, well thought through. As episode 5 is Confidence and Paranoia. That's where that's what I wanted to say. Yeah. So I'll just go for the episodes. Episode 5 is Confidence and Paranoia. That's where Lister's hallucinations, he gets ill with some mutated form of space flu, and because it's mutated, he starts having a fever dream. But because it's mutated, the hallucinations he have come to life. So he starts hallucinating raining fish, but it actually starts raining, and then he hallucinates into being two characters. One's the embodiment of his confidence, played by a future American chat show king Craig Ferguson, the Scottish comedian, and Paranoia, played by Lee Corns, who is probably best known as Dickhead in Bottom and the science teacher in Grange Hill. I think he was very close to being Rimmer as well, which is how he got the job. And then Me Squared is basically springboards the plot from the Confidence and Paranoia ends with Lister thinking he's turning on Kachansky's hologram. Because Christine Kachansky is the woman he was secretly in love with when the crew was alive. They later rejig that or reset the story to imply that they did actually date. But if you watch the early seasons, it's I think Holly says he only ever shared 171 words with her, and so. But anyway, the Confidence and Paranoia ends with Lister thinking he's turning on Kachansky's hologram, but it transpiring that Rimmer had swapped the discs and he's made a duplicate of himself. And then Me Squared is the plot is all about Rimmer sharing a bunk with himself and slowly driving himself crazy. As a show, contains probably my favourite line in the whole of the first series, which is "Shut up, you dead git." So I hope if you haven't seen it, you get a little gist of the type of show that Red Dwarf is and the type of plot that they like to do. Very imaginative and original. Part of that originality came down to the fact that they wrote themselves into a corner purposely because they didn't want to fall into science fiction cliches, because they thought that would lead to a very generic series. So the rules they imposed on themselves were that the human race was the only race to have ever existed in the history of the universe, and so they wouldn't have aliens in the series. They later got around that by series 3 and 4 by cheating by creating Gelfs, genetically engineered life forms, which are, to all intents and purposes, are aliens. The other one was they weren't going to have a comedy android in it because they thought that was too close to Marvin the paranoid android in Hitchhikers, and obviously they later went back on that. But having imposed this rule on themselves, no aliens, no comedy robots, that they said that really freed up their imagination and freed them up to come up with more original plots. And I think, as I've said, that's the thing that really sticks out for me. Series 1 as a whole, it's not my favourite series. I think series 2 was really where the series found its feet. It's where the cast look a lot more comfortable in the roles. The jokes got better. Series 1 has they made a decision to have the interior of the ship resemble a submarine, and then they even start making jokes about how grey the set is. It's a very dull looking series 1, and partly that was down to the fact that they had a set designer who didn't really have much of an interest in science fiction, or at least making something that looks cool, like Blade Runner or Alien. It just looks a bit like a cheap set or a cheap version of a submarine. Series one, although it has its moments, it does definitely have its moments. All the series have its moments, and it does have some good plots and some good jokes. It's there's a kind of stiltedness to the performances. It was Craig Charles' first acting job as well, and I think he was a little unsure of himself behind the camera, and maybe mistimes a few of his jokes. Danny John Jules is always great, and has never not been good as the cat. If you ask me, he's still in the latest ones. I think he's still the best thing about it. And Norman Lovett was very dependable in his deadpan sort of way. So there you go. That's just my thoughts on series one. I said I watched series 12, just to jump forward 30 years here. I watched series 12 episode 1 last night, Cured. A few initial thoughts on that. I said I'm going to. This is initial thoughts, not a full on review. There's I do differentiate between the two. But what did I think of Cured? Well, the plot was that they stumble across the crew stumble across a space station, and they discover living in there a scientist, and also there is Hitler, Mesopotamia, Joseph Stalin and Vlad the Impaler, but they've all supposedly been cured of their evilness. That's the basic gist of the plot, is what happens when you cure evil. As an episode, I thought it was on a par with one of the better episodes of the last series. Series 11 and 12 incidentally were filmed back to back, so I was pretty sure there was going to be a consistency of tone from series 11 through to series 12. But I would put it on a par with one of the better episodes of the last series, of which my favourites were probably Crisis and Officer Rimmer. So it was up there with them. I liked they sort of fall into a formula now. You usually with Red Dwarf you get an opening sort of standalone, almost sketch if you like, and then the main plot kicks in. And which is usually very exposition heavy on the part of Crichton. So I like the opening skit of the cat playing poker, and how it wasn't just a standalone bit of a bit of business. It did tie into the resolution to the plot. It was. One of the big problems for me for the recent episodes, it has been there have been a few cringy moments, and the cast starting to show their age, with the energy of the performance it isn't quite what it was. It's not quite there. It's also fallen into the kind of last of the summer wine trap. People forget that. The last of the summer wine was a much maligned program by people of my generation, just because it was on, for years, forever, I remember my granddad always insisting that it was a great show, and I was thinking, no, this is terrible. It was maybe a great show 20 years ago, and part of the reason was for that is, I think. Well, I'll get into. I think there is a shelf life with sitcoms. Which is usually like around the 7-year mark, and the reason for that is sitcoms sort of tend to rely on a self-contained situation never changing, and I think after about 6 or 7 series, the fact that the situation never changes sort of stops being funny and starts being tragic, if you like, and that's what's kind of become a little tragic about Red Dwarf. I'm sad to say, which is that it was funny having these two young men, back in the 80s, stuck together on a spaceship, potentially for the rest of their life. But when you actually see the actual outcome of that, 30 years later, they're still there and they're still acting like or trying to act like they're 20 years old. It does actually spill over from being comedic into being tragic. So I think Peep Show was starting to fall into this trap a little, towards the end. Still having those guys living together in their early 40s. But Cured wasn't, the worst episode. The worst is a few bits that got a rise out of me. The comedy's played very broad now, though. It doesn't quite feel that convincing. The performances of the cast, a lot of them, it feels like a performance now, with the exception of Danny John Jules, who's still really good in the role. Really perfects his timing, I think, and still gets a big laugh out of me in his money. He doesn't get many moments, Danny John Jules. So when he does, he tends to play it to the rafters. Not great, but not bad. So I'm going to wrap it up there, folks. Join me next week for my review on Series 2, and I'll have a few other videos coming out around the same time, not just of Red Dwarf. I've got a bit of time off, so I can dedicate. I'll probably get a few more videos out next week than usual, but Series 2 and 3 coming next week, and my initial thoughts on episode 2 of Series 12. So until next time, folks, this is me, Big Buddha, signing off, and I shall see you all out there in YouTube land.